Hey there, listeners. It is Tim back with another episode of the River Valley Podcast, and I have two phenomenal, just very great friends of mine here as the guests. You're familiar with the man to my right. This is Rod, our missions pastor. Rod, how you doing?
Doing wonderful. Thank you.
Awesome. And then to my right is a dear friend, Mr. Tom Criswell. Tom, how are you today?
I'm well, too. Thanks. Appreciate it, Tim.
Got a first-time flyer here on the podcast, but if you've been with our church for a while, you have seen him around as our elder chair.
Hopefully it's not the last one, by the way.
No, no, not the last one. But you guys definitely make a presence during our Uganda weekends, which is what we're talking about today. So if you've been around River Valley for a while, you know these faces. But that's what we want to talk about today. We want to talk about missions and specifically what the Lord is doing over in Uganda, because I think people have an idea. But what I want to do is open our eyes to just all the real powerful things the Lord is doing over there. But before we get to that, a question just that some of us, when we think of missions, I wanted to ask you guys. It was on my mind, not that I have this challenge, but this question of, as a church here in Grants Pass, with so much happening locally, so much need, etc., why are we focusing on global missions? So I want to send that up to you guys. I understand it's a question that you guys are asked often. So, what do you guys have to say?
Well, I would just say, why missions? I think a waterfall of humanity is flowing into the abyss of hell every second. I mean, tens of thousands of people are dying apart from Christ every moment. And, you know, the Great Commission is to go into all the world and make disciples of Jesus. And so there's parts of the world that have been easier to reach. And now we've got the harder parts, either because of social distance and racism and ethnicity issues, or physical distance. You know, the most remote places have yet to be reached. Wow. And so, that's on all of us to finish the job.
Well, I agree. That Great Commission sums it up pretty well, doesn't it? It says, go into all the world. We live here in Grants Pass, and it wasn't so long ago I was told that we've got something like 50 churches here in our community. One could argue that we don't necessarily have to go quite as strongly into places where there is the gospel so readily available as it is, not so much in places like Uganda. And one of the nice things about doing ministry over there is that they speak English. And so we fit in really well. Obviously I have to learn culture and things like that, but language and really communication is not one of those difficulties. That's one of the great blessings of Uganda.
For sure.
Yeah. And my kind of quick answer to that question, because the two aren't exclusive from each other, right? It's not local or global. We have an opportunity to do both.
And it's definitely on us to do both. I mean, it's a both and. Woe to us if we go around the world to win disciples and don't make disciples of our own sons and daughters and the people in our community. And so, we have to make disciples here in Grants Pass, but that doesn't absolve us of the responsibility of going around the world as well.
That's a really good point.
It's that old bloom where you're planted, and we're planted here for the most part, during the year, but, on occasion we get over there and have an opportunity to plant over there, and so good for us.
Yeah, and there are servants over there that are blooming, which is definitely what I want to get into whenever I'm able to hear the reports that you guys have for Uganda, and hopefully get over there someday to see it. It's just, there are servants of Christ just working so hard, and they are blooming, and a lot of that is due to just the opportunities that you guys have had to impact over there. So a little bit about you guys. How did you guys get into the mission field? And even if you want to share a little bit to the origin of the work that we have over in Uganda. I know that's a podcast episode in itself, but how did you guys, was that something you always wanted to do?
Yeah, Really, our mission work, Shirley and I, started about 40 years ago. We did what River Valley does here every springtime, and that's send a bunch of kids down to Mexico and start doing ministry in third world countries. And we did that for about 10 years. When we finished up with that, we started a small nonprofit organization called High Cinco. And it was another 4 couples. We had a district attorney, a pilot, a school teacher, an engineer, and another guy that was, I can't remember what he was doing. But we formed this organization to go down into Central America and begin working with impacted kids all throughout Central America. And we did that for about 10 years. And then I got more connected with my brother, who is a missions pastor. Worked with YWAM for about 15 years, and he started an organization called KIDS. His KIDS stood for Kids in Dire Situations, and he and I worked together in, faraway places like Afghanistan and Bosnia and Kosovo and, a lot of the places over in the Middle East. And then we moved here to River Valley and began the work with Camille, and that's really kind of led us into the work that we're doing with kids in Uganda now.
And Rod?
My journey started about 40 years ago as well when I was in college. And a friend had been on teen missions, and he was all excited about it. So I checked it out. And so I went to Brazil over the summer. And, I got to say, my motivations weren't all pure. I just wanted to see the jungle and the Amazon rainforest and all that stuff. But God uses stuff like that.
Absolutely.
And like 90% of long-term missionaries start out as short-term missionaries.
Sorry, what was that percentage again?
I've heard 90%.
Wow. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So at the end of that summer in Brazil, it was 81, I made a commitment for lifelong missions that I would be a lifelong missionary. And we wound up in Africa for 22 years. I thought I was going to die there, and who knows, I may still, but yeah, forces kind of led us back home to the States, but I'm so happy to still be heavily involved in missions.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm happy that Rod came back to the States because his son is one of my best friends. So I don't know if that would have happened if he was over in Uganda. Wow, that's a really cool journey. It's cool to know that missions has just been on your guys' hearts. I mean, both your stories start 40 years ago. That's really cool. So to kind of give our listeners even a little bit more introspection on the life of a missionary, I think if I were to ask 100 people, what do you think the hardest thing about it being a missionary is, they'd come up with some answers that probably hit around the bullseye. But for you guys that have lived this life for 40 years, what is one of the harder things that maybe somebody doesn't realize, or what's the thing that's kind of taken its toll on the life of a missionary?
Wow, that's a good question. I think there are unexpected costs, like when family members die, and it doesn't make sense sometimes to go back immediately, and other people have grieved, and you kind of grieve, but you get home and you realize you haven't grieved with everyone, and so there's that separation. And another one I would say connected with that is that you talk about home, but home is never the same once you've left it, right? And you can't go home again. I think that's true in a way, and in a way that's a blessing, because Scripture says that we are aliens and strangers wandering this earth, and missionaries get to understand that truth more than almost anyone, because they're never completely home in their country of service, and when they go home, they're never completely home there either. And it just makes us long for our heavenly home, and realizing that we're just here on a short-term basis.
Wow, that's good.
Yeah, Rod, yours is experience is different, obviously, because you had long-term exposure over there. Shirley and I primarily have done short-term kinds of mission trips, And, the travel back and forth is tough. Going into a third world country, if you haven't been into third world countries before, it's a shock. It's culture shock. Coming back is just as big a shock because people who have spent enough time over there and have seen how much of the world lives comes back and sees how we live, and to a large extent take great advantage of what we have here. So there is that kind of shock to it. And I agree what you said, Rod, about people becoming missionaries who have gone on short-term trips. We have had that same exact experience with a number of people who have done short-term trips with us and then came back, cashed it in, and said, God's calling us to do long-term work. And so it's culture. It's it's really the shock of seeing things so different from what we're used to.
Yeah, the kind of what you said about what is home through student ministries. We've when missionaries we support come back, I guess on furlough, there was this family, and it was really interesting because they were here for a long time, and this is where their family was rooted out of. But one of the siblings saw here as visiting home, but one of the siblings was waiting to go back home to where their mission field was. And I mean, they both operated fine here, but it was so interesting. And with missionary families, like it's a full commitment, and it makes real sense that a kid might say, "Yeah, I'll totally do that. Sounds fun." But then a month in or whatever, they realize this is what wasn't I signed up for. But it's a family commitment, and so I could see that being really hard.
Well, you don't realize the cost involved to your children. I'm like, I'm young, I'm going to go serve the Lord. And then you don't calculate how it's going to affect your kids. And
right.
On balance, I think it affects them in a real positive way. They get to meet a lot of adults. They're surrounded by godly people. But they also are never quite as comfortable in their American culture.
Right.
And that's a cost to them as well,
Right. Yeah. So no, those are great answers. Just again, so cool what you guys are doing over there. Now I want to take the rest of the time and focus on Uganda, and let's just start with maybe each of you have just a powerful story, or I'm sure you have a list of them of just things the Lord has done over there in your time of service over there in Uganda.
Yeah, it's hard to pick out one or two
Right.
after the number of trips. We've been over there 30, 35 times.
Wait, real quick, 35 times for
Yeah,
you?
I've about 35 trips to Africa now.
Wow. And any idea where you're at?
I'm probably, we've talked about this
Yeah.
before, probably about 30, but he's packed it in a lot closer time period than me.
That's cool. All right, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah,
That's a big number.
I think I would say probably one of the neatest things that's happened to us is when we did that 3-month tour at Teen Missions in Nakabongo. Camille Hatlock was going to be away at a conference, and she asked us to go over and kind of care for her Bible college and the farm where she was taking care of about 20 kids. I wrote a little book on this, and the first few days or so in my journal, it was, I mean this reverently, what in God's name am I doing here?
Plug, by the way.
Well, right.
I don't have any more of them, so it's not.
It's 90 days in Nakabongo, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I think we had it for a while.
Yeah. So
Never got it autographed. But
2 or 3 days into this, journaling, it was really, what am I doing here? This is nuts. 2 or 3 days before we came home, after 3 months, it was, why are we going home? What is back here that we can't do over here? It was the relational component that we got a chance to experience, and probably one thing that most people aren't aware of, I think, especially in Africa, they understand what it is to live in community. For the most part, I think the Westerners don't understand that. We're fairly independent people. When you're spending enough time over in Africa with a number of people, day in, day out, 24/7, eat together, work together, pray together, and have that time and opportunity to get to really know people well, we realize what it is that we're missing in this country. And I think it has to be experienced. I don't think you can explain it to people what it is to live in deep community with people. And I think that's how God designed us to be in relationship, deep relationship with each other. And that's the time where we got a chance to really experience that. And I think that was one of the markers that set us, on the path to continue doing this work, was that, that community, that sense of community.
We got a story from our last trip just last month. And it was kind of coming full circle a little bit. I came to River Valley 5 years ago, and Tom and I, like the month after we got here, Tom and I with our wives went to Uganda, and Camille Hadlock, our missionary there, was lobbying heavily for a primary school. And, I'm brand new, and I'm like, man, we've got a secondary school. We got all these other responsibilities. I just don't think so, let's not get overextended. So the next year, she still lobbies for it. The next year, she's lobbying for it, and someone's provided some funds. And we're like, all right, let's go ahead. And so last year, they built one half of the school, one wing of it. And then this year, they've completed the second wing, and it's going, adding a class each year, and it'll be up to 200 in a couple years, but it's about 150 right now. But the thing that killed me in a good way was that when we got there, the kids were all cheering, and they had signs, welcome, you are loved, but one sign said, you are in a safe place. And I thought, oh, that's a little strange, but interesting, And we started talking along, and the kids were out of school, but they had been invited to come back to welcome us, right? And they all came. They weren't like commanded to, if you don't come, you're in trouble. And so we had a little ceremony, a couple hours, but the kids stayed, and they stayed till like 5 o'clock at night. And I'm like, what are the kids doing here? Well, this is their safe place. They're happy to be here. They're playing. And I thought, man, what we've done is a good thing. And these kids are learning scripture and learning about becoming disciples of Jesus. And, whatever doubts I had has just vanished. Camille was right. We needed that primary school, and it's been a huge blessing. And so I just want anyone involved with giving to Uganda to be encouraged that young people's lives are being affected for eternity there.
And it's not just the education part. As you say, it's it's really the love and the appreciation these kids get. We forget, I think, that these kids have gone through the trauma of losing either a mother or father.
Right.
In the West, something like that happens, we're going to have a grief time, and there's going to be people there that's going to understand and, give support, et cetera. Many of these kids don't have that luxury. Plus, they don't have that help there for that anyway. But they never get an opportunity to really live through that part of their life. They're still worried about, what am I going to eat tomorrow? Is the roof going to leak at my house? I mean, is there going to be enough food? And those are the kinds of things that are happening at the school here. They get fed, they get clothes, an education, and they get love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if you are over in a place like Uganda and a kid associates your organization with a safe place, what more could you ask for? I mean, that is so cool to hear. And forgive me, I started this podcast with an assumption that anyone listening is fully aware of what we're doing. Halfway through the podcast isn't the time to talk about what we're doing, but a quick just elevator pitch, if you will, of what I love. Your story kind of set the groundwork for it, but maybe real quick, just what we have over there, and when you guys go visit, what you go visit.
Yeah, so we started about almost 15 years ago by starting a rescue unit up in Kiboko, where Camille Hadlock was still working with Teen Missions. And our idea there was to really, have a couple hundred kids that we could do a good job caring for. That quickly morphed into the organization that we were working with at the time, asking us if we would take another 5 rescue units, which took us up to 1,000 kids. The idea then was to expand a sponsorship program. sponsor a kid, the money that you put into that sponsor child pays for his education and some emergency food or clothing or meds, shelter, that kind of thing. It kind of grew from there to where we inherited a high school from that same organization, and we've, over the last several years, have put quite a lot of funding into it to build an infrastructure and really make it a school that was really top-notch. We've got, I think now, over 500 high school students there. 5 rescue units. We've got an eyeglass clinic. We have a traveling medical facility, and a number of smaller kind of programs as a part of what we're doing over there. Primarily, again, taking care of orphan kids.
Yeah. So when you say inherited, what I'm hearing is someone sees what you're doing, they have something of their own, and they say, we want to give this to you because obviously what you're doing is powerful and it's working and it's a good thing. So there's buy-in from people that maybe weren't a part of what you were doing in the first place.
Yeah, we've done, I think, a pretty good job of sharing here at the church what we're doing. But we also try and use social media and friends and relationships, and we have had some significant things happen. Financial gifts, etc., that have come in to really help build out that area over there,
right.
and really want to make this ministry something that's going to last quite a long time. We have a scholarship fund out of the high school where top kids, we help pay their tuition to college. And Rod and I, tell them about our Calero trip, if you will. Our last trip up at Calero.
So there's a program called COPE, which, do you remember what the...
Concentrate on practical education.
Right. So some of the kids aren't going to go on to college. And so we make this sewing program, tailoring program available for widows in the area, and also some of these orphan kids who are finishing up with school. And so it's a practical way that they can make money and have a business of their own. And so it's a 6-month training program, and we have 30, a room with 30 or so treadle sewing machines, and these young people learn how to sew and be a tailor. And the interesting thing is that after 6 months, they get a certificate, right? And here, we would not consider walking across a stage. Right. It's like, mail that to me or whatever, But there, that's a big deal. Wow. And we went, the day we were there, was a graduation for 30 of the students. And there must have been 300 or 400 people there. The equivalent of the governor of the region was there. It was a 4-hour program.
Wow.
It was, for me, about 3 hours longer than it needed to be, but it was so impressive that these people took this so seriously and felt so impacted and grateful for it. And, that's a question of leveraging our finances and resources, because it really doesn't take that much to do this, but a huge impact for the community.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
That's a really cool story. I appreciate
Well,
you.
the fun part was that the graduating class, the top 6 sewers were given a sewing machine as a gift, and now they could start their own little business.
That's life-changing.
Doing things,
Well, I really appreciate the stories, and I got one more kind of big question for you guys. And as I hear the stories over in Uganda and other places you guys go, my big question is, what is the biggest difference between church as we know it here in the United States and church in other countries? And whether it's the service or even just how evangelism takes place. It's a huge question, so a broad spectrum of answers, but...
Yeah, I'll speak to the church service here in a minute. But I think in terms of the evangelism, one of the things I think that's characteristic of working with impacted kids is that we need to spend the amount of time necessary to try and meet most or all of their real physical needs. You're dealing with kids over there that maybe have one meal a day. They might have one set of clothing. They're going to sleep in the dirt, under a grass roof. These kids have issues, medical issues, malaria and, skin infections, things like that. And so a good part of what we're doing over there is trying to address the human piece and then, tie that to the spiritual piece. And I think that's the strong part of our program, is that we try to reach both of those. It's very hard, for example, to expect a kid to study well and pay attention in school if he's hungry,
Right.
or is embarrassed to be able to, not have enough money for a uniform, those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's far more than a mercy ministry.
It truly is, yeah.
How often did we see Jesus do that? Hey, I met your physical need. Now let me tell you about the spiritual.
And that doesn't necessarily happen so much here in the U.S. because I think for the
right.
most part, our physical needs are met, and even way beyond that. So in some ways, it maybe is a little harder here. Over there, you have an opportunity to help in ways that are, very necessary for people just to live. And when they see you, interested enough to, touch their bodies, their persons, then they're going to be much more receptive to listen to what you've got to say.
Wow.
Yeah, differences. I mean, it's hard. I think we need to be careful not to generalize, because, there's places like us, there's places that evangelism is really hard, places where evangelism is really open. Many parts of Africa, you can freely evangelize. And to talk about Jesus openly, or even get a sound system and stand on the corner and set up your own little program and your own little, evangelistic crusade.
Pretty common.
You can do that.
Wow.
But there's other places where you'd be thrown in jail or killed for doing that, And so, I do see, in terms of worship, that oftentimes in Africa, the worship services are 3, even 4 hours long. And the reason is that, first of all, their faith seems to impact every aspect of their life. People need God more than here. I mean, we need God here, but we don't have that felt or perceived need. And then the other thing is, people are just so busy in the West, right? There we're like, hey, I don't have anything else to do. Let's hang out and worship and fellowship. And so, as Westerners, as missionaries, often we get irritated with the long services and stuff, just because we don't have that patience. We're not accustomed to doing that. But I also see that there's places like Tom and I have recently been in India, and the worship services, I don't think in my 40 years in missions I'd ever seen more authentic, passionate, sincere worship than among these Indian believers who, in a sense, were risking it all to come together. We were going to go see a baptism one day down by the river, and at the last minute we get a phone call and said, don't come, there's some secret police who are hanging around, and if they see you, it will taint all the baptisms like it was Western influence, right? And Hindu nationalism is huge in India right now, and so there's a significant life-changing cost involved in becoming a believer. And you can fool around and listen to, a preacher, but if you get baptized, that means you've changed teams, and that's when you're in trouble.
Well, it was also interesting when we learned about that concept of power encounter versus truth encounter.
Yep.
And we could spend a lot of time talking about that, but just to say, miracles, people talk about miracles here in the U.S., you hear a little bit about it. Miracles, in a country like India are much more commonplace. And I think it's because, many of the population verbally have never been valued. And so to try and go over and maybe share the gospel in a way that you might hear really doesn't have the same impact. People have, for their entire lives, been told that they're not people of value. So why would you try to share a gospel with me that says I'm a person of value? But show them a miracle, or have them see something where is clearly God's hand in demonstrating the truth of the gospel, and all of a sudden you have believers. And then the stories get out there, and all of a sudden then you have really committed, sincere, authentic, sold-out Christian people.
This lead missionary was telling us a story about his daughter who had died, and the group got around and prayed for her, and she resuscitated, raised from the dead. And we're like, that's amazing. And have you ever seen this happen before? And he's like, yes, either 6 or 7 times, and that blows out our concepts.
Rod and I were looking at each other like, that's incredible. And the response to his was, why are you looking that way?
Right.
It's like,
you haven't done this?
You haven't seen that in your country?
Yeah, you guys have probably seen it 100 times.
It was unbelievable. That was a tremendous moment, I think, for me anyway.
And was that kind of maybe the first time you experienced that culture shock? Was it hard to kind of, understand that, being from the culture we are in the United States to experiencing that maybe is a little bit more of a norm over there, or?
Well, that process, that whole concept of the truth encounter versus a power encounter was new to me. Yeah. But Rod knows this.
It happened in Africa as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we were in Tanzania the very first year, I shared with the church, and Rod has heard about this, where there was actually a child brought back to life. And we had 3 or 4 other family couples, along with Shirley and I, in Pai, Tanzania, where Rod had been working, where we watched a child come back to life after having been dead likely 1 or 2 days.
Wow.
Now that will open your eyes.
Oh, how can it not?
Yeah.
Tom was really gracious. I needed someone to watch my 6 when I went to India, and he came with me. And so we had a really just life-changing experience when we went. But what we realized was, it costs so much money to send a Western missionary, and then you can't even do it because they can't go into a lot of these restricted areas, right? So the strategy with India Evangelical Team, the mission we're partnering with, is that they'll convert. People will come to Christ, and within days they're like, well, who's going out from us to go to plant the next church? And it's called the Church Planting Movement, or a CPM. And one day we were at a church dedication, and pastors from everywhere had come. And at the end of the service, people were starting to go home. The hosts were going to feed us, but a big rainstorm came. And so everyone kind of sheltered inside the church until the rainstorm calmed down. And the lead missionary says, well, these 4 men I've discipled, and they've planted churches. And those 4 guys like, well, those 4 men we've discipled, and they've planted churches. And those guys said, well, we're discipling these 4 men, and they're in the process. And so there were 4 generations of missionaries within maybe 8 years. And so we were so excited about this, and that they had discovered the secret sauce of church planting movements, right? So Tom and I came home. We said, we're hoping against hope that the elders will receive this. And we first met with Michael Bond and Pastor Mark Goins, and they got similarly excited. Yeah. And then we met with the elders, and they're like, let's do this. And so if you don't know, we are sponsoring 33 missionaries full-time for $5,000 a month, which wasn't in our budget, but we found it because we thought it was important enough. And so we've made a 5-year commitment for these 33 missionaries who, based on past experience, they anticipate 60 or 70 churches and 3,500 to 4,000 new believers as a result.
Yeah. Well, to tag on to that, too, we came back off of that trip, and the very next day we were here, we met with Mark and Michael. This was one of those things where we kind of didn't feel like we could wait to explain to them what we had seen over there and the kind of work that those guys were doing. And exactly, Mark and Michael both were like, we got to be a part of this.
Yeah. So just to connect the dots with the listener, this is the same India evangelical team that we talked about at Vision, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and again, I'm guessing most of us put the pieces, but wow, what a cool story. That's really powerful. So the Lord is moving in Uganda, the Lord is moving in India, and we are blessed to be a church that's a part of it.
We get to go along
Amen.
for the ride.
Yeah, we get to go along for the ride, and really cool what happens when the Lord's using people that are listening.
Yep.
Well, as we wrap up, is there any kind of one last thing that you guys want to share, or an encouragement, or anything?
I guess the last thing I would do is just plug the sponsorship program we've got. We have a lot of people that are sponsoring kids. A couple of people in our church have got 50, 60, 70 kids themselves. And so, I would just say we've always got kids in line to get sponsored. If you're not doing that, please feel free to do that.
Don't wait till
If you're
February
already
to do
doing
it.
one, do two.
All right.
And I would just say, if you're watching this, you've probably already self-selected and are somewhat interested in missions. My challenge would be, what role are you playing? You go, you send, you pray. We all have a part to play. My 94-year-old mom, she talks about how she witnesses to the people in her dining hall, and she's like, I don't know if they heard it very well, but, but I'm like, that's the spirit, right?
Yeah.
That until the day she dies, she's like, how am I going to make a difference for the kingdom? And that's what the question we all have to ask.
That's right.
Yeah, go, send, pray. I like that. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Listeners, thank you for coming along for the ride. This is the first time with Tom, won't be the last, and it won't be the last time we talk about missions. So thank you, and we will catch you guys in a few weeks.
Farewell.
Appreciate it, Tim.